Hello, Civ fans! I'm Sarah Darney, your host for today, as we get prepped for the exciting launch of Civilization VI Gathering Storm. It is coming out in about 10 hours now, tonight at midnight Eastern Standard Time. So today we're going to go a little bit behind the scenes. We've got a lot of really fun stuff to show you guys. We're going to be talking about leaders, how they came to be designed, how they came to have art and come to life. We're going to be talking to some animators, concept artists. We've got a couple composers coming too, so we can talk about the music. We have a little bit about modding, and at the end of the stream, we're going to show you the new Black Death scenario. I don't think any of our streamers have shown this yet, so new gameplay. But first, let's get started. We have Ed Beach and Dennis Shirk in the studio today.
Hello, hello.
Thank you guys for coming.
Welcome, Civ fans. It's great to be on once again, and now we're just so close to the launch. It's really exciting.
It's just hours away.
Yes.
So I just want to get started and talk about like the history of the franchise and what you guys have contributed to it, because I know we've got a couple of veterans here. So Ed, you're the franchise lead designer for Civilization VI. How long have you been part of Civ?
Well, I've been at Firaxis for 10 years, so just crossed that threshold in the fall. And I first was hired in to work on the gameplay systems for Civ 5. John was the lead designer then, but I was particularly getting all the gameplay systems ready for what we wanted to do for like unique abilities for civilizations. And then I also had a big role in setting up the AI for Civ 5 as well. I wasn't a total newcomer to the Civ system. At that point. I had actually worked as a subcontractor to Firaxis on the Civ 3 Conquest expansion pack. So was familiar with how a Civ game went together, what design for a Civ game looked like, what the base game looked like versus what we could do with scenarios, that kind of stuff. But obviously once I got here, full immersion.
What about you, Dennis?
I've been here almost 15 years. I've been working on Civ titles since Civilization 4, back when I was in marketing department. You're familiar with that?
I am.
I made the jump during Civilization 5 development and helmed Civilization 5, both expansions, working with John and then Ed, and then continued on Civilization 6. Briefly handed off Rise and Fall to the very capable hands of Andrew Fredrickson, and then returned for Gathering Storm, which is really exciting because this is the expansion I've always wanted.
Oh, really?
Not everybody is a environmental event kind of guy, but I am.
Okay.
So for those of you who are like that, make sure to crank it up to 4 tonight once you've unlocked the game and make things a lot more interesting.
All right, so what part of Gathering Storm are you guys most excited to see fan response to?
Well, I'll just continue what I was just talking about.
Go on.
Obviously, there's a lot of great things to enjoy in Gathering Storm, and probably most of you watching this have already read through a lot of the reviews, previews, watched a lot of the streams. But for me, it's just the life of the world. I mean, the World Congress is a lot of fun. The power systems are a lot of fun. But all of my mojo is right there in the world. The storms, the droughts, trying to manage your effect on climate change, the way sea levels rise, the effects that has on gameplay. It just adds a whole new dimension. Because typically, a player is only playing in reaction to the other civilizations in the game. That's it. And this adds a whole other level. And it's that way in real life. You can't just count on just what somebody else is going to do to you. You have to watch what things are happening around you. And I just think it adds a whole new element that just wasn't there before. It wasn't there in Civilization 5. It wasn't there up till now in Civ 6. That's what I'm most excited about.
Nice. What about you?
I actually think the civilizations themselves.
Okay.
By the time we get to the second expansion, we can get more creative. Yeah. We can throw things out of whack even further than, we know how far to go to make things really interesting, but not totally unbalanced. So between the Maori, who can't really produce things the same way everyone else can, but they don't need to because they have so much gold, it's just not a problem, to the Maori, who start in the middle of the ocean and have to find, where possibly can we settle? There are all these continents around us, but we don't know which one's going to have the open space for us. So I think the civilizations themselves are great fun, and we're going to get lots of input as to which ones they think are strongest, and we're going to be paying attention to that too, because we want to make any tweaks we need to them, and we want to, look at maybe adjusting some of the base game or the rise and fall civs as well. So we're going to definitely have our ear to the ground, and so that's the reaction I'm kind of looking at.
I can't stress that enough, by the way. While our QA department does an excellent job of giving us all kinds of feedback, it's not until you have 1 million people really playing your game that you get the excellent feedback. So continue posting about it on the forums. You may think that we're not there, but we're there. We're always watching. So.
I think the thing that I'm most excited about is just seeing the stories that people will post about, their games, their histories that they're going to be writing. When you and Carl had your multiplayer game the other day, it played out
epic.
It played out in such a different way than like I expected, and just seeing
people have posted. I bet that was scripted.
We couldn't script that. We're not that good.
We're not that good, especially to get the AI that close to victory. And, so.
I found Carl in the kitchen yesterday, and I was just like, how's it going? He's like, it'd be better if it weren't for hungry. And this, it was actually like a day later, still kind of walking around, a little shell-shocked in the eyes because he wasn't expecting it at all. And apparently what he had said is that he had just missed the denouncement that came through. If he had seen the denouncement, he might have been ready, but it was just a subtle thing that changed his.
I think Pete and I actually ended up, Carl, look at those notifications again. Yeah. So we made sure he did eventually see it before it left the screen, but he was very surprised.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about some of the things that are coming with Gathering Storm. The weather and the climate system is like this huge added layer to the living world of Civilization 6. You've already talked about that a little bit. So how did that kind of start in the design phase? Like what kind of iterations did it go through?
This will echo back to anyone who looked at our very first stream, because I remember we were focusing on that then, but it's actually always bothered me how static the Civilization world was. And the fact that there could be floodplains that never did anything, and mountains that you knew were volcanic, but they never erupted. And we had actually had, I think in that Civ 3 Conquest expansion, we put in volcanoes that could erupt. But we hadn't put them in recently, and I just wanted the world to have more life. So the first thing we knew we started right there with floodplains and volcanoes. And we were like, let's put those in, get them tested, see how those work, see how that felt. And I think everyone got excited right away, and they're like, what about everything else? And we wanted to be a little bit careful. We didn't want to put in too many things that just felt random. It just felt like, wow, that's punishing, and I had no way of protecting myself from it or knowing it was coming or whatever. So
it's still a strategy game at the end of the day.
Yeah. Disaster simulator.
So we wanted to tell you if you're going to settle in a dangerous spot, and we wanted to be careful. People ask me all the time, like, what about earthquakes and tsunamis? And yes, maybe we could add those kind of things down the road, but those are things where they do strike very unexpectedly.
Yeah.
And earthquakes, there are earthquake prone areas, so we could maybe make some indications about that, but those are always already the areas where volcanoes are going to hit and things like that. So we wanted to make it somewhat predictable. And so when we need more of this stuff because it's just fun and it's making the world feel alive. We decided to add storms, but I wanted to make sure that I could even out the distribution of those around the map. So I didn't want to just have hurricanes or just have sandstorms. I wanted to try to get all the different terrain biomes hit relatively evenly. And then I make sure that the code is accounting for where each one's starting. So you actually do see in the game that there's some patterns, like just because of the way hurricanes move, they have prevailing winds and stuff. I have enough of that in there that you will see like a hurricane alley form. But it actually, most of those hurricanes are starting in different locations on the map. They just happen to be taking the same path because I wanted to try to make it so it was very rare that storms would start in exactly the same spot multiple times in the same game.
Nice. So a lot of the things that, came to Gathering Storm, they're very new for the series. Besides World Congress, there's just a lot of stepping out of this known comfort zone that we had. So what's it like to have things a little more open-ended? Is it more challenging, or is it, you get to spread your wings a little?
I actually sort of love working on the second expansions, both for Civ 5 and Civ 6. Those are the times with Brave New World and now with Gathering Storm where with the base game you're so concerned with just getting all the systems in place and getting them all balanced with each other properly and making sure the AI is understanding everything. And then even for the first year or so after release, there's a lot of feedback that's come in, and you have to be responding to that and getting everything lined up. Finally, by the time you get to the second expansion, it's like, okay, we have a nice stable platform to build on. We don't really have quite as many fires to put out, so let's do something entirely new for the series or creative. So with Brave New World, we added so much in terms of the great works and the archaeology system and that whole new culture victory and then ideologies. Had a ton of fun with that. We definitely wanted to, we had enough of that in Civ 6 already that, again, we had to pick a new direction.
Right, yeah.
And so with Gathering Storm, it was climate and man and the environment and that relationship. And not only was it just sort of the climate coming at man, but I love the idea that we could also have man push back at the environment. And so canals and the Golden Gate Bridge and the Panama Canal as wonders and building dams. And, it feels really good when you can make a change that really impacts the map so that all of a sudden something has just opened up in the game for you.
You really challenged the graphics team this time. Typically, the engine team doesn't have, they're constantly tweaking and refining and making it a little faster. And then every time Ed would bring up terrain deformation, there'd always be a little bit of a shudder you'd feel coming out of the graphics office. And this time
earthquake in the Firaxis office.
He pulled out all the stops. And he's like, we need it to flood. Yeah, we need the terrain to depress when it floods. Also canals. And we want volcanoes to erupt.
There are a lot of interesting
storms.
configurations of canals. Like, can this piece meet with this piece? And if it's so we had to go back and forth to work all that out as well.
The best bug with that was there was a tornado bug where you'd see a tornado and the tornado would move, and then everybody would be dying way down here and off to the sides. And we sent the save over to Ed going, Ed, what's wrong with this? This isn't working. The tornado went this way and all these other people died. And he's like, well, that's because it's only using the beginning and the end of the path. And then when they actually hooked it up and wired it up, the tornado was going ooh, like it would in real life, and you actually saw this trail of destruction.
I actually sent a series of maps of tornado paths across the Atlantic to our graphics programmer who was working on it and saying, shh, believe me, tornadoes and hurricanes, like so it was a hurricane path map.
Yeah.
They do not travel in straight lines.
Right.
Because he had done a nice curving spline from point A to point B, which looked visually very impressive, but it wasn't what the gameplay was mapping to and what sort of real life maps to. So Ted and I worked that out. We got that sorted out. But
big kudos to the graphics team. They really stepped up, and not only that, but people will notice a lot of the improvements in terms of graphic performance, the particle effect system, all the things that we're patching into the game, into the back patching into the other games. Gathering Storm is probably the best running, most efficient Civ that we've ever had as well. Turn time improvements, the whole 9 yards. Just a lot of work that went into all of that.
And an awful lot of that did get patched back to the base game in XP1. So when people get their patch notes later today, they'll be able to just go through the laundry list of everything that's been done, and it's quite an impressive list.
All right, so another question I've got for you guys. Diplomacy is a big part of the Civilization game. So the grievances system and the other changes that went in for Gathering Storm, how did they come to be? Like, what was that like trying to create these?
We've got one member of our design team, and I'll give a shout out to David Raby, who's just been entirely focused on diplomacy ever since he started working with us during the Rise and Fall period. So he put in the emergencies for Rise and Fall. He helped buff our government district. He was been our point person on World Congress throughout. And if that wasn't enough, he's like, I also want to change the warmonger system and let's add grievances. And David and I had to kind of work it out because he had too much on his plate with World Congress to get that in as well. But I was like, you've got a great plan for what we should do with grievances. Let me take that off your plate and make sure that gets in. So I did a lot of the work on the grievance system. We had a lot of help from our UI team, adding a whole new panel where we can kind of itemize. It's much better than the warmongering system was, not only in terms of the players feeling like it's more fair, but now there's also this nice detailed log of each time a grievance has triggered one way or another. And so you can see that, you can go back, oh yeah, that makes sense now why that guy is still mad at me because I'd forgotten that I had sacked 3 of his cities and hadn't given them back to him.
I keep the same kind of log on my phone for people that I know.
Yeah. So there's
That's
probably
horrifying.
Maybe there is an app for that.
Yes.
Oh boy. Now I'm scared. What have I done to Dennis? What grievances do you have against me?
On the list.
All right, so when we're moving into this, future era. The Gathering Storm deals a lot with the future, both the late game and beyond, things that we haven't done before. How was it to design kind of this near future that's not based on history? Like, it's not things we've done yet before.
It's interesting. This went down a few different paths. I mean, we always intended on putting a future era in the game, but it started out a lot more traditionally.
Okay.
Railgun ships, the typical near future units, typical appended tech tree, arrow to the end of the tech tree, typical end of tech tree text. And as we were fooling around with that and exploring it more, we decided to stretch our legs a little bit. Like Ed mentioned earlier, experimentation in XP2 is rather welcome. So Anton decided to start noodling with what happens at the end of the game. And part of that was the idea of randomizing the tech tree and then hiding what was at the end, which is what ended up shipping in the game. So you can never see what's there until you get close enough and research the tech before it, and then it exposes the connections that come up, which is a great new approach. It's funny, like mid-development, after he put this in, he just was like, I wonder what it'd be like to randomize the whole tree. You turn that on, and then after we put out all the fires and the people that had ripped shirts off and there was just debris everywhere, we fixed that and put it back to the way it was supposed to be because that was horrifying, but it was a fun thing to do because it's just experimenting like that is often fun. I think Ed mentioned that if modders really wanted to dig, that those bits are still in there if they wanted to play with it. But it was great to just watch that process unfold and come up with something completely new that was not in Civ before. And then the GDR came back, and they didn't want it to be like it was before. And the reason we don't have the traditional units at the end was because we decided to do an upgrade path for a unit. So the GDR would upgrade different abilities depending on the tech that you unlocked. So it just gets stronger and stronger. I saw a review that said it is hilariously and awesomely overpowered because once it's all stocked up and everybody has them, you're leveling cities. And at that point in the game, if you've played that far into the game, you want that very satisfying feeling of having something very powerful that you worked very hard to get to. And it's an exhilarating new unit in the game to fool around with, especially when you have visuals like walking through shallow water. You can like go into water and you can fight in the water just like you would fight on the land. It's just, the graphics team again is really stepping up. The VFX team is stepping up. So the future era stuff is really exciting in this one. If you decide to devote yourself and play that deep in the game, you're going to be really rewarded.
And you do have to sometimes. If you're on a challenging difficulty level and you're trying to get either a culture or science victory that just, we've pushed those back in the game, so they're further in there, and especially culture where you have to overcome how well the AI is doing. If the AI is playing a strong culture game, it just takes a while. So you end up getting through all that content pretty often, I think, at least in my playthroughs I have. So people are going to have fun with that.
Nice. And speaking of people, our lovely fans out there, what suggestions and feedback from the fans, like how does that affect the process? How much do you listen to? How do you balance like what everyone wants, the leaders that people are asking for with, what the team wants to do?
It's always part of our calculations. Even when I remember back to, I think it was Brave New World, the leader selection process was a little different than normal because we had a survey come back to us because we had done a survey on what are the civs that you think are missing from the game. And we wanted to factor that into our equation of selecting what leaders were going to go in for Brave New World. And for the longest time, I think it was like a week-long process. We had these big marker boards up. We actually had voting periods, cut downs, the reasons for and against, who was on the bubble. The unfortunate time when you're watching Canada just on the bubble, but not quite getting there. But that process is amazing and fantastic because part of that is the fans telling us what they would love to see balanced out with what the design team and Ed really need to have in the game. And it's not just that, it's even whether if something is just out of whack or out of balance, players reporting something they would love to see, modders putting up a mod and it becoming really, really popular because it obviously presents a deficiency that we have in something like our UI. All of those things are amazingly useful, and we just vacuum it all in. It's just amazing. I want to say a collaboration, even though they're not necessarily collaborating, but they are without actually actively knowing it.
The one thing that Gathering Storm includes that's absolutely an homage to the fans are the canals.
Yeah.
And so many times fans have posted, look at my canal city setup. I've got 3 canals getting from this interior lake all the way out to the sea. So we knew fans would find a canal district and things like the Panama Canal very popular. But absolutely the fans were right there, because
Oh, yeah.
as soon as I started making it so you could build a canal district, and all of a sudden my ships were sailing places they weren't, there's just like this amazing visceral feeling of being able to drive your ship through a canal that I didn't realize was going to be there, that's absolutely there with the game now.
Right.
All right, I've got one more question, and then we're going to dive into our next segment. I heard a rumor that you could tell us a little bit about what's coming on the horizon with modding.
Sure. Well, I can't say specific dates because it's still in progress. Once we switched off of our official Gathering Storm work, we turned our attention to getting all of the modding and SDK tools updated. So that's in process, coming soon. Again, I'm not going to give you an exact date. Hopefully, well before spring, we shall see. But we're going to be updating all the tools. We're going to be updating the art depots to include all of the Expansion 1 and Expansion 2 art packs. We're going to make sure Scout Cat gets in there too, just because we've seen way too much feedback that there needs to be cats and tanks, and cats here and cats there. Cats and tanks.
Cats everywhere.
Pretty neat, yes. World Builder received updates for this expansion, and later on I believe you're going to be talking to Dave McDonough and Carl about Black Death. And Black Death was a great exercise because we basically told Dave, who hasn't worked in the Civ 6 engine, to basically come in and create the most radical expansion scenario you can with just the modding tools. And when he ran into roadblocks, we corrected those roadblocks. So even with World Builder, those who know how to enable it, it's still a dev tool. It's not user-facing yet because we still have more work to do on it that we're progressing on. But the simplest things like being able to paint the continent in the tool instead of doing it tile by tile, having coastal stuff show up automatically. There's a lot of little issues, big issues that we're correcting, but we took care of a lot of those in the build that's coming out. There's more to come, and that'll come out with the SDK too.
And just so people are aware kind of what had to be done for World Builder just to support Gathering Storm, we have taken all the TSL maps, and there are new versions of those that go out with Gathering Storm. And so they have the ability to place volcanoes and the ability to mark coastal lowlands and all those kind of features that you need to make a map respond to all the systems within Gathering Storms. Those can be set up in World Builder now, so it's definitely getting there.
Yeah, but keep in mind, we are not done, but we're forging ahead. So there's even better things on the horizon for that, so stay tuned.
Soon. Very soon.
Very soon.
All right, so what I want to do today, and we're going to start this with you guys, is I want to talk about how we create leaders from the very beginning with like just the initial kind of idea all the way to the end and getting that person in game. So I kind of wasn't sure necessarily who I wanted to pick, but for multiple reasons, we went with Kupe of the Maori. So we're going to talk a little bit about him and how he came to be. So first question I have for you, when you chose this expansion theme for Gathering Storm, how did that affect the leaders that you picked?
It's interesting that when we're selecting leaders, sometimes they're directly tied into the theme that we have for the expansion, and we have a few leaders fall out that way. Other times it's more like we need to expand and get a civ into West Africa. So geographically we need to expand. So we get maybe the Mali brought into the game for that reason, or we get the Ottomans brought in because we need some kind of warmongering civ, and we've been saving them back. Haven't included them in the base game, haven't included in Rise and Fall, but we knew that we wanted to do them when we had all the power of the second expansion to bring them to life. And so we waited for them until now, but we knew, okay, now it's their time. But the Maori are definitely an interesting case because we did not, Kupe has a very strong environmental agenda, and that's sort of the theme of playing them.
Yeah.
But we didn't arrive at that right away. First of all, we identified Polynesia had been a very popular civ in Civilization 5, and so we should go back and revisit that. There were a lot of people, we knew the fans liked it, but there was a lot of people internally on the team that were clamoring to, let's get some Polynesian representation in there. So we looked at various segments of Polynesia. We decided we did not necessarily need to go as broad as we had before. We have this ability now to work in city-states, and we decided very early on that we're going to have the Rapa Nui city-state, and we would get the Moai statues into the game.
We had to.
Through a city-state with the unique city-state improvement. So that gave us sort of the flexibility to do what we really wanted to do, which was dive in deep on one specific Pacific culture. And so we looked at Tonga, we looked at Samoa, both who've been very powerful nations in that part of the world. But we kept coming back to the Maori, just very unique look to, how their warriors, we had used their warriors as the unique unit for Polynesia in Civ 5. The art team was incredibly excited with the chance to have a Maori leader in the game. So then I also started reading up a little bit about their environmentalism and how they really are pushing to try to save and protect the Pacific Ocean. And once I realized that was going to fit so well with the expansion theme, they became a done deal at that point.
Nice. Okay. So is it always kind of the same way, like this ability or behavior of a civilization? Does that always come first, and then you kind of find a way to fit it in, or do you know sometimes like, okay, we have to have this civ, now we design that?
Yeah, it works both ways.
Okay.
So, for instance, Eleanor of Aquitaine is a good example of us having a gameplay mechanism sort of that we knew we wanted to attach to a leader or civilization. We had, Anton had talked when we did the live stream on her about how we had experimented with loyalty having different effects, and maybe it would flip a city directly to the person who was putting the loyalty pressure on it. So we knew that was a cool effect to play around with, but back when we were working on Rise and Fall, we weren't sure how strong to make it. We didn't want to include that in that expansion. We wanted to look for someone down the line who that'd be very fitting.
Yeah.
Eleanor, we didn't immediately think, oh, she's naturally this person who messes with loyalty. We actually stumbled upon her because it was so compelling to have somebody who had been so influential in two different nations. During her, she lived an incredibly long time. So, she actually, it wasn't just a few years that she was influential in France and a few years influential in, it was decades. She was influential in both those countries. So she was just a great fit for an alternate leader, and having alternate leaders that could plug in multiple spots was a great way to go. And so it was sort of that we got to both those things separately and then married them together. Kupe was very different in terms of as soon as we knew we wanted to bring the Maori in, we started looking for leader candidates, and we looked at what the modders had done for Civ 5. They had several Maori mods, and they had tended to focus on 19th century Maori leaders who did a great job of repelling some of the British invasions of their island. But it was hard to pick which one, hard to figure out which one stood out, and the idea of what Kupe had done, where he had packed up all his belongings and just said, we're going to strike out and we're going to trust that we're going to find a new homeland. That was just such a great story that that also was not only a great story, but it was a great story for players in the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we absolutely made it so that the Maori are going to start the game out in the middle of the ocean with no idea which direction land is, and you have to go and make that same voyage that Kupe made.
Nice. All right, so there we go. We got it up there. So what kind of character did you want Kupe to be? He's this sort of semi-mythical being. We don't have video of him or photographic evidence. So, I guess you kind of had a little bit of room to play there with how he would be.
We absolutely did. But once we realized we were going to tie the Maori to an environmental theme, and the inspiration for that was interesting because I started reading and doing as much background research on the Maori as I could, and I found this video where a group within the last 5-10 years had sailed from New Zealand in the Waka ocean-going canoes all the way across the Pacific. And they have pictures of them sailing in under the Golden Gate into San Francisco Bay as part of their message of, we care deeply about what's going on in the Pacific. We want it to be as cleaned up and nice to live in for all the people in the Pacific Basin as possible. So that just sort of was a kind of a key finding. I'm like, okay, we want to make sure that this is a civ that thinks real carefully before they knock down any environmental trees, forests, woods, rainforests, whatever nearby them. And that's sort of a fun new twist on gameplay as well. And so, we said that's going to be the leader agenda. That's going to drive that part of his character. Now, naturally, because the Maori people are so expressive and they have the haka and everything else, there's a lot more to Kupe when you meet him in game than just his environmentalism. But I just sort of let the art team take that and run with that side of him. Because,
we're about to
that worked out
talk to
fine.
them, and I'm so excited because there's some really cool art that we're going to show.
That's a great story too. So it'll be good for the fans if they haven't read any of the New Zealand articles where we've gone into that deeper, just to hear about the process that you go through for somebody like Kupe, especially for his tamaka for the facial tattoos and how important they are and the meaning behind them.
Yeah.
Was a lot of great challenges that the art department had to overcome to make sure that we did that one right.
So how do you decide what's going to be the Civ's ability versus the leader's ability? It sounded like Kupe had his journey story, and that was going to be his ability.
Right.
But how do you kind of figure out?
So the what we put elsewhere in the Civ was the fact that they can get a lot more out of keeping woods and rainforest and all the other features around them undisturbed. But it was that ocean-going voyage that you start out in the middle, and sort of the bonuses necessary to make that happen that we had to all tie to the leader. So just in case people do want to experiment and have an alternate Maori leader who's one of those, maybe leaders who helped fight off the British, they can do that, and they'll have a more traditional start. They won't start in the middle of the ocean, but they can come up with some other great bonuses for them. So it's all about looking at, if you were going to pull that leader out, what's sort of the core essence that has to stay back with the Civ and the unique unit and unique improvement to sort of still make it a logical whole.
Right. It still has to stand on its own.
Yeah.
Now, we had a little bit of changes to that with Eleanor and England, correct?
Right.
So how do you kind of deal with that situation when leaders come out later after the fact and you have to be like, okay, I don't know that this person necessarily works with the original Civ?
Yeah, it was tricky with Eleanor because we knew that England had to be sort of one of our flagship civs for all the industrial age, industrial revolution changes we wanted to have. And so canals, there was a canal mania that overtook England in the late 18th century or into the 19th century, where they were building canals madly. And so some recognition of that, which we did by giving their military engineers extra charges to build canals very quickly, we wanted to have that in the game no matter what. And so we were changing England's ability. We're getting rid of the British Museum ability that would have definitely helped Eleanor, but we realized pretty soon that that was actually going to be too strong with Eleanor. So I think it actually worked out okay. But it's definitely something we have to keep in mind. If necessary, it's been nice because we have been able to go back into our older civs and, revamp them, change their abilities. So as we keep progressing forward with Civ 6, it's also fun because, I recently played a game as Teddy again because America's gotten a big update.
Oh, yeah, that's
And so I hadn't played an American game for a while. So it's great to say, oh, wow, this Civ's, feels brand new, and let me go give it a try.
All right, so were there any leaders that were just particularly challenging to figure out how they would play? We are not two-dimensional people. Everyone has different sides to them. Though Carl is a bit of a warmonger at times, he's also a very cultural player.
Yeah, Carl's good at the cultural game, and I don't think I was going to, if I hadn't used my advantage as Hungary, I think I would have lost the cultural game to him because he was starting off strong there. Hungary's actually a good example itself because Matthias, although he expanded the Hungarian borders as far as they ever were able to go and had the largest Hungarian empire, and so obviously he was a great military leader as well. He's actually probably just as well known for the huge collection of books that he collected and how he was sort of a Renaissance man, looking at what was going on in Italy during the Renaissance and trying to bring all that kind of new, exciting culture and art and everything to Hungary. So we could have taken him in an entirely different direction. But it's just sort of, that was a case of we had found a really fun new way to twist the gameplay for Hungary with the city-state emphasis and giving him really great abilities to levy city-state troops that, some people might
Which
have
is
taken
awesome.
advantage of recently.
It's just sitting here grinning.
And so we knew we wanted to go with that. So we actually said, okay, well, maybe Matthias will reappear in some other game, and maybe he'll have a more cultural bonus that time. But this time, he's not going to be cultural.
Interesting. I've never thought about it before, but it would be interesting to see, like, the double leader we have with Eleanor, just the same civ, but just a different take.
Well, and the modders have explored that, and I think they'll continue to
Oh, yeah,
explore
okay,
that.
cool.
So that's
awesome.
The Steam Workshop has all sorts of great stuff on it.
All right, so history, obviously, is a big inspiration as, we're designing Civilization. But it can be limiting. There are certain things that happen in the game that, have never happened in history, like America building the pyramids or Australia building the Great Wall of China. So how do you balance, like, the historical accuracy with, just fun gameplay and making sure that it feels right?
Well, you hit the nail on the head with those two examples. That's what Civilization is. So we start everybody out the same. The history on that starting point is all the same. We know who the people are, we know what the civs are, we know what they start with, their unique stuff. And the fun of Civ is how you build your own history from that point on. So when you start at the start of the Stone Age and Teddy Roosevelt builds the pyramids, it's because that's what Civilization enables you to do. I think if you were playing a straight historical Civ, it would not be the same game. If you had limits on what they were allowed to do, it would not be the same game. So just the ability that, Teddy Roosevelt gets in the early war with Montezuma, because you built the pyramids and he wanted the pyramids, so you sent all of your ancient cavalry to go strike at his modern battleships. These are situations that can unfold in Civ.
Yeah.
And yes, balancing all of that to make it that all engaging and fun is his job, not mine. But that's what makes it so much fun, because you can have just about any situations. And you've had the eternal argument going on in the community forever, Spearman versus tank. And that argument will never completely go away. And we've been, fighting with it for a long time, going one way or the other. No, they shouldn't be able to scratch a tank. Yes, that's half the fun, is
Right.
the possibility of killing the tank. It's just like moving your settler on the first turn. These are all things that make Civilization what it is. But I'll leave the design considerations to this guy.
And I think all I want to say there is just that the history is great because it allows us to come up with brainstorm, ideas as to what could this person's unique ability could be.
Yeah.
What is going to make this unique unit special? How is this, unique district or unique improvement going to work? So the history inspires us there, but we have to make sure it's all going to make sense within the game model that we've created. And so ultimately the gameplay is going to win out. But the history can, it can lead to situations that feel correct. And whenever that happens, that's always kind of the coolest moment for us as designers. It's like, yes, we actually saw this giant Spanish fleet that was Armada size, that was sailing across the ocean to try to conquer another civ. When you see those kind of things, you're like, okay, now things are lining up well. This is great.
I like it when things don't line up well at all.
Yeah, and sometimes some people don't, but
that story.
The people who've read a lot
part.
of the history.
Yeah.
So whenever we announce a new leader or a new civ, we always see comments about that leader, like, oh, they weren't the most well-known person, or they weren't the greatest leader of this civ. Why would you ever pick them? But I think it's more than, like, just picking the greatest person in history or the most well-known person. So how do you decide when you're going to pick, the most well-known person versus someone who's might be less well-known but have a more interesting playstyle?
Yeah, and I think that's changed as we've gone through the series. I think now some nations have appeared 6 times in their series. And so we feel like, sometimes we want to put a leader in because he is a fan favorite, and we want to not break that streak that they've had of being in the game. But sometimes it's fun to shake things up and go in a different direction. And France, for instance, has been in the game every single time, and we've had a lot of different leaders for France, and we just had Napoleon in Civ 5, and we wanted to we looked at that as a civ where we could do some experimentation this time. And we really, really needed to find a way to emphasize and get people interested in the new espionage game that we were putting in for Civ 6. It was kind of more detailed and nuanced than anything we had done before. And we wanted somebody in our game to be just really good at playing with that particular play style. So Catherine Medici was a leader I was very familiar with, and I knew that that was just how she had held on to power during those years that she was trying to keep her family on the throne in France. And so it just was a case of finding the right fit for that particular leader. But other times, I think the first time that we introduce a leader or a nation into the game is we're very unlikely to pick a more controversial pick. So for instance, Hungary's going into the game for the very first time now. We want to sort of pick a leader for them that's going to let all those people in Hungary who are getting into the civilization, someone that they can really stand behind and be proud of. And so we actually do things like we look at who's on the currency of the country, who's are in statues in public squares, those kind of things. So that gives us an idea of making sure that we're actually picking somebody who is well esteemed in that country.
Nice. All right. Well, I have one more question before I let you guys go. Part of the world of Civ is all the different cities on the map, and I've seen quite a few people asking, how do you pick like the city names for the individual civs? Because sometimes it's like the old words, sometimes it's the new words. What goes into that?
It's sometimes cities don't exist. Sometimes they didn't have cities. Sometimes there's not enough
That's
cities.
That's the hardest one, yeah.
So oftentimes we'll have to create cities from geographic locations. We'll take some modern cities and mix them in there as well. A lot of it's just based on game mechanics of wanting X amount of cities in there as well. A lot of times we'll be lucky enough with a more traditional civilization where all those city names are available. They're just readily available. For things like the Maori, that's not so much. You have to take geographic features, modern towns, things like that. So it's always a challenge, but the research always bears out. There's plenty of things to find to populate those lists with.
And we actually had some New Zealand members of our beta test team who live over there, and they helped us massage that list. And so the list, that was actually, I think, a list where we actually iterated on it 2 or 3 times to get it to where it needed to be. And they helped us with that a lot. And so in general, if we have resources like that, we want to take advantage of it. The other thing about city name lists is if a leader, like Victoria was in power in England during the 19th century. So we actually go and our designers who are doing this research look at population of cities at that time period. And we try to put the cities in an order. So if people are like wondering, like, Brasilia is the capital of Brazil, why isn't it first on the Brazilian city list? Well, when Pedro was in charge of Brazil, I don't think they'd even founded this new capital city of Brasilia yet. So it didn't deserve to be first on the list. So, a lot of thought like that goes into it. The tough ones are the ones like the Cree and the Mapuche.
Right.
Where, there really are not cities the way you would think of it.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us. I hope everyone out there has enjoyed it. We've got a lot more coming up today. We're going to take a quick break, though, and just let our new guys come in and get settled in, and we will talk a little bit more about Kupe and the art. Civilization 6 Gathering Storm is coming your way in just a few hours, tonight at midnight Eastern Standard Time.